All right, I can take it from here. I think we can cover potentially a little bit of where we're at in terms of status and to-dos. So just a couple of quick updates from me and Dan. We did contact Sandy Vance for the virtual Connectathon and asked her. We discussed having some focused breakout sessions, but that were sort of advertised by the Connectathon rather than full track. And she said that was okay. So I submitted that to her just for tracking purposes. So we'll keep on top of that. I think what we'll do is discuss with the group, we had about 4 different ideas, kind of an intro session, a SQL session, I think an OMOP session, and then a testing session. So I think the general consensus was let's have just some dates and times for those if people want to join. I think it'll definitely be good to just advertise that to the broader HL7 community too. So let me and Dan work on those exact dates and times over the next week or so, and then we'll get back to you guys with some ideas or polls. But I was thinking maybe 2-hour sessions each or something like that. Let's keep them time box. How's everybody feel about that plan? Cool. Great. A couple other to-dos we had on our plate. Poll for SQL generation. I just took a look at it today. I think we're pretty much set on consensus is January 9th. We still want to keep that. That's our normal meeting date. Do we still want to keep that even if we're having a session during the Connectathon on SQL generation? How's everybody feel about doing a SQL generation more focused conversation on the 9th of January?
Sorry, when is the Connectathon?
I want to say it's January, Nikolai, correct me, is it 15th, 16th, and 17th, something like that?
Yes, something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm going to Europe marathon, like FHIR marathon.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of fire on your plate that week.
Yeah, I should understand. Would I be able to handle this?
I personally think it's probably a good idea just to have a deeper dive on that. I think we got a lot of folks who are able to join on the 9th. And so just having a focus session on the 9th makes sense to me still. So how about I put in the Zulip? We'll do that session on the 9th. It just seems like a good use of time for that one session. And then we can continue the conversation in a breakout session a couple of days later. I don't see any harm with that plan. Okay. So we'll call that poll closed and we'll do that on the 9th. So we've been talking about it for a few weeks. Let's put it on the calendar. The other thing is just a call out to the group. If we do want to have a session about SQL and FHIR and OMOP, and I'll try to make sure, like, I know Graham is really interested in this topic and a few other folks. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put up polls for those individual breakout sessions, but just start to reach out to folks who may be interested in that topic in particular. Of course, you, Craig, and I know you, Nikolai, too. So just start pulling out feelers for folks to have that conversation, because I think we'll need some of those folks who have been doing some work on that from other directions. So that's just an advertisement for the group.
Yeah, the Craig started discussion in a MOP 5 Zulip about terminology mapping, because it looks like the first step we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So I visited like last week the Vulkan meeting. Guys were busy with IPS, but hope maybe tomorrow is going to be the next Vulkan meeting. And and I promised to the guys to introduce what we are trying to do from SQL on FHIR side. Mm-hmm. So probably you all invited into meeting tomorrow. I can send the link. So it's going to happen almost the same, like 1 hour later than this meeting tomorrow. So we can visit our OMOP friends and discuss how we can collaborate on this.
Yeah, great. I think that's just great. That's what I'm thinking of, just contact new people who we know. And then when we have that breakout session sort of set, the time and date, then we'll advertise that to maybe I think you mean the Zulip stream as well, so people will see it. That's what I'm thinking about there.
Well, now, yeah, let's see what we can do with Vulkan together. I think this like terminology mapping should be done by these guys, if they will agree on this. Yes. So and then the transformation will be done using our SQL and FHIR stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't have a lot of context on that. I mean, I know a small amount about that, so I'd be curious to see the outcomes of that. So that's the OMOP stuff. Any comments about the plan, ideas for agendas for the Connectathon, or how Dan and I are thinking about that? Okay, good. So I don't think I'm going to go through the to-dos. You guys can take a look at that. I'll copy it back into the post after this meeting. But yeah, where do you guys want to take it from here? Do we want to go to the feature list spreadsheet, talk about milestone 1? You guys, I don't have an agenda other than that.
Yeah. Let's discuss this feature list. So I just sketched this feature list from documentation. The general idea that like all members of the group can create their own column and put like -1, 0, or 1. The -1 means this feature should not be part of this release. 0 means I don't know, and 1 means that it should be the part of the release. And then we can decide what our feature set for the release. So I think probably we should work with Dan. We need feedback from Dan, Graham, and Josh at least. Yes, and the other guys, you're welcome. So the spreadsheet is published in Zulip chat. So I see only 4 people said these numbers. So it's me, Ryan, John, and Craig. If you need any comments, yeah, please ask in Zulip chat. And next meeting, I think we can finalize the feature set for the release.
Yeah, but just to be clear, this is not like saying we should or shouldn't do this thing. It's just saying what more should we do before we rule a line under this and create a milestone for the spec, right?
Agree.
Yeah, so that's the intention. It's sort of community voting about interest for the milestone release and specifically, right? Cool. So we can advertise this for people to fill in and vote for the features for milestone 1. So that sounds good. I posted the link in the chat. Anything else for feature list, or is everyone good with this structure?
So I have a question. Would you mind, someone mind reminding me what FHIR path restrictions refers to exactly?
I think that there's a Graham's idea that we can allow like arbitrary FHIR path stuff, and the idea of to declare what features of FHIR path were used like as a text or something like this. And I think I named it after Zulip discussion. Maybe not, but yeah.
So is it like a way of the runner sort of advertising its capabilities?
Yeah. Advertising capabilities. Yeah, I can.
Or maybe not the runner, but the actual definition, the view definitions. At least I thought that's what it was.
Yeah, I think that matches my understanding. So I think what Graham was asking for was if when a view definition is defined, it would declare its intent to be compliant or compatible with a version or a set of capabilities, and so basically restrict the FHIR path to the subset of things that are supported there. Because I think Graham also had use cases where he might want to use like arbitrary additional FHIR path and views, but he wanted to kind of make that like an explicit indication in the view definition, or when somebody writes a view definition, they can say, yeah, this should be compatible, or no, it's not, and then as the runners can choose to well, we can validate and everything accordingly there. So I think it's basically some sort of field or enum or code that would exist, be added to the view definition to define the intent there. So I think it's a fairly low barrier to entry there, and yeah, although I think I see that I didn't actually vote on that one yet, but yeah, I think that's my understanding of it at least.
Yeah, that aligns with my understanding of it too. Was that conversation we had around intent? I was looking at my notes again, and it gives the potential to allow for implementations or use cases that want to have broader FHIR path, a broader expressivity of FHIR path, or broader set of FHIR path used to be able to exist alongside other more limited sets. So it seemed like that element of it seemed like it made sense to me. So we could have sort of more incremental, more granularity in the implementations. So I'll double check on that as well, just so in case we miss any ideas out there. But I think that was the main one.
Sorry, the column C in a spec or candidate reflects the current status of the spec.
I wrote that, but I think that's what Nikolai meant there, with the green star being it's currently written in the spec in the normative section. We have to split off what's normative and not, but in the spec as normative, and then the question marks are ideas that we have been discussing
The
for
green-
potential addition.
The green is what were discussed and already in the spec. So
Yeah.
the question marks, if you see something missed, but I think it's important for us to do the feature freeze, and because some people don't want to implement spec because it's changing. For example, this is feedback from my team. The guys, they said, okay, we implemented this, now it's renamed and again renamed. Okay, so we need to freeze and release the first version.
Okay, so any questions on sort of voting on the feature list at this point from the group? Everyone's good with it?
Let's ping other guys and try to finalize it.
Yeah, I think that's the next step. I was hoping some of them would be on, but probably busy today. So after the call, I'll ping some folks and advertise this on Zulu. Okay, next up. So I didn't, like I said, have anything more specific than just some status check-in and this. Where would we like to go?
So I went through the GitHub issues since last meeting, and I actually opened up a bunch of pull requests, just sort of miscellaneous stuff, which has been sitting around for a while, just sort of known issues and that sort of stuff. So if people can have a look at that and we can merge that. And then, I guess the other question I had from last meeting is maybe we could talk a bit more about what this milestone is. Is it just a version? Does it have a name? Is it going to have any significance beyond that, beyond just a sort of tag that we use internally to talk about? Or are we going to, what will be the significance of this version, I guess, in people's minds?
I think it should be commitment, at least don't rename something from our side. And we should decide what kind of commitment. Ideally, it should be like backward-forward compatible. If we can do this that way, that would be nice. We still have to understand what does it mean, but I would guess that we should commit that we're not going to change like get resource key to get ID back or something like this.
I guess like maybe what I was thinking, if we use like along those lines, if we use sort of the semantic versioning model where we declare this as 1.0 and anything that is the 1.x frame cannot have breaking changes, we reserve the right that maybe we need this to be a 2.0 that does have breaking changes, but I mean, because it's hard to tell looking that far out, but yeah, I mean, I'm tempted just to keep it simple, call this 1.0 the spec, and kind of iterate on it from there. And then I think the other thing is like as part of this, we do some sort of, obviously tag it in GitHub, have like a long-lived 1.0 website, so when 1.1 and 1.2 comes out, people can still link to look at the different versions and that sort of thing as well. But basically, just treat it like as a 1.0 sort of software release or open source release, just so we have a clear like point in time that people can point at and say, hey, I'm implementing 1.0.
Could using version 1 be confusing to some people, considering there was a previous spec called SQL on FHIR version 1?
Gonna be 2.0,
Easy fix there, John.
I mean, we've got plenty more.
Maybe we do just call it 2.0. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We should just call it 2.0, and that way we don't get into the confusion of like some of the like implementation guides are like on version 3, but use FHIR 4 and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we can just call this 2.0, but I don't have a strong preference, but that seems reasonable to me.
Good call out, John. I didn't think of that, but I like the solution. Bashir?
Yeah, actually on that note, SQL on FHIR v1 and SQL on FHIR v2. So one thing is that, I don't know if others also feel that way or not, but like SQL on FHIR v, I mean, in some way, the SQL on FHIR v2 is kind of like fundamentally different than SQL on FHIR v1. Like v1 is like mapping like FHIR resources to like a database schema. This is more like a way of telling which fields I want from like a FHIR resource, and then create like a flat view. I mean, maybe it's not a big deal, but sometimes I have seen that talking to people who are not very familiar with either of that, they may get confused, saying that, like, I mean, I tell them that we have SQL on Fire V1 support and we are implementing V2, but you can still work with V1 and things like that. And some people say that, okay, we will wait for the V2 and not have to explain to them that that's a separate thing. So I don't know whether this is actually a concern or not, but.
Yeah, so what we did was we actually took SQL on Fire V1 and we sort of imported it as informative content into V2. So we've basically got in V2 with some pretty minor changes, I would say. Yeah, but I agree that it's confusing. But yeah, it's one of those hard naming things that I don't have a really easy solution to it.
But I think too much invested into like branding SQL on Fire. So let's keep it this little bit messy, but
just the name Fire on SQL instead of SQL on Fire and really confuse everybody.
Call in the marketing folks. Yeah, I think that my opinion on that would be because in our work and where we are going with this project and this work, we've had the opportunity to talk to probably dozens at this point of folks who are implementing SQL-like or tabular or rectangular structures from FHIR data. And from our perspective, we haven't heard a lot of specific talk about SQL on FHIR V1. I'm not saying that we should just do it because of that, but I think that a certain subset of folks know what SQL on FHIR V1 and like understand what it is. And those are the only subset of folks that are probably have this confusion. They're probably technical enough to just jump over it to, okay, this is a different model. This is approaching a different problem. But the broader audience, which is a vastly larger set, in my view, would probably be like, okay, well, now I can start fresh from something you're calling V2. That's my take of sampling the market industry. So I'm not overly concerned, I think, is the gist there.
Like Web 2.0, yeah.
Yeah. We'll work on the branding in a bit. After milestone 1 will be a big branding, 6 months of branding. So
yeah, just one question for John. When you said we moved that SQL on Fire V1, are you talking about this spec itself, right? I mean, where we have the old V1 as a under the SQL on Fire V2, I think this is the columnar schema guidance. Are you talking about that?
Yeah, they work together. Yes, that's what John did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think we came up just short of actually saying that this is sort of part of the normative specification that we're talking about. I think I made some minor changes to it just yesterday, actually, just to bring it up to date to like make sure that it has full coverage of the data types in FHIR and just a few other minor issues. But I think otherwise it's pretty much untouched. And we've got some other sort of informative content in there as well. But I think pretty early on we sort of came to the idea that the view definition would be sort of the main feature of this particular specification. So I agree that it is a bit unfortunate and confusing that these things have been sort of named the same. But yeah, like Nikolai said, we've got a little bit of inertia now, so I don't think it's going to be easy to sort of rename things at this point, unfortunately.
But my vision that we will incorporate more than just view definition and SQL on Fire, but it's going to happen a little bit later, like query definition and model definition.
Yeah, and I think it's all still a bit up in the air about the whole progression of this. So once we do get to a level of maturity, what is the pathway? There could be aspects of this that get promoted into the core FHIR spec, and then what happens? Does some of it, and like if we say create a view definition resource, does that part end up in the FHIR spec? Is there a balance that lives in sort of a companion spec somewhere? So I think that there's still those sorts of things to work out as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I think we've been talking about really like very low level the details of view definitions for the past couple of months to get to this point, which I think has been very effective. But that would be really interesting to have that conversation about what that broader roadmap essentially for SQL on FHIR. And if I put another wrinkle in there, like even SQL can be potentially a little misleading here, right? In the sense that it could be different rectangular technologies and implementations as well. So I don't want to open the naming can of worms, certainly
Yeah,
at this point.
sorry for.
Yeah, but my vision that
FHIR is
the
like
next step.
sweating.
So when you define like tables, you will want to define queries, and that's the next definition we're going to discuss. It's going to be like query definition, ANSI SQL or something like this on top of flat views. Because I know, let's say in CQA, we'll be interested to publish view definition with the report queries, yes, and you need the way to publish your queries as well with the flat view definitions, yes, and that's from my point of view the next topic we're going to discuss, how to like standardize the query and how you can publish the query, at least the basic stuff like.
Yeah, absolutely, and
there where the SQL will come back.
well, but
We're coming
the
for
thing
FHIR
is,
mapping language and SQL both.
so no comment, FHIR, but it's not. I think that's for sure going to be on the radar for the next year. But even broader than that as well, it's not necessarily only SQL, right? It could definitely be multi-language there as well. So, like, how do you wrap the query part of this as well, since they all sort of go together if you're going to build a really interoperable system for analytics? But I think the broader point is start to have conversations around what that roadmap looks like, and maybe let's get through the Connectathon. Let's get through milestone 1, or even we'll start maybe some of these conversations in the next, let's say in January, and just give that sketch. Because, and I've been having conversations about SQL and FHIR specifically to folks who spent a lot of money building their own FHIR to tabular data systems, like I said, and they have some really interesting problems, really interesting use cases, but they will want to start to understand what that roadmap looks like. So that's certainly interesting to us as an organization, but also to lots of folks in the industry. So I'd love to have that conversation. So I'll put it on our agenda list and just keep track of it for everyone. As we get some time, let's focus on milestone 1, in my view, the next couple of weeks, and then kick off that conversation and then have it in greater depth. How does that sound to folks?
Sounds good.
Good. All right. So John, yep, I saw some of your GitHub issues and pull requests. So folks on the call, let's definitely take a look at those and just clear those out. There weren't that many outstanding issues, if I'm not mistaken. Go take a look right now. There's only 11 issues outstanding, and I think a lot of them are, you have pull requests for half of those, John, I think.
I think most of them will be closed if we close those pull requests. A few of them will live on, like test result aggregation. I wrote this ticket called informative versus normative a while ago. I actually don't really think, I think it has significance once we enter a certain phase of the standards development process. I think it's been mostly addressed for now by restructuring the spec. I think we moved some of our sort of informative content to a totally different sort of hierarchy within the site, and I think that's a lot clearer now. So we can probably defer that until we sort of enter a more formal process, I think, because I think at that point we need to be quite clear about what parts of the spec people are sort of interpreting in a certain way. I think most of the rest of them will actually be resolved. So that's good.
Thanks for that, John. I think we can clear out a little bit of the backlog. And just on that point of informative versus normative, I definitely want to take my own pass at the spec as well. Hopefully I got a little time in the next couple of weeks to do that. And then, yeah, and just at least make that distinction a little bit clear. It's a little bit like, oh, where does normative part end at this point? And then there's this kind of sort of parking lot, which is fine, I think, for now. But if we can tighten that up a little bit and just get to a more, I would say, fleshed out, definitely the narrative sections are a little bit terse, and then a little just more edited and give it a little more structure. Because when we get to a milestone 1 release, we'll try and make noise about it and have people beyond our little group who've found us on their own start to implement it. So yeah, we appreciate that, John.
The other thing that I thought we could maybe revive the discussion about a little bit is the remaining testing gap, and probably we'll have to, if we're going to run a session about it on the Connectathon anyway. So maybe is there a spreadsheet that we had that we can maybe just have a quick look through, bring it up to date? I'd be interested in taking a look at what's left and contributing to it.
Yeah, good call. It's at the top of our to-dos. I'll put it in the chats.
But I think we can use the spreadsheet with the features and just create test case for each feature, which we identify as a separate feature.
Yeah, we can pick
Like-
which one is the master.
Yeah.
Let's have the feature spreadsheet be the master. If
Yeah,
everyone's cool with that.
I like this, yes. And
Then I'll make a new tab, import the testing stuff to it. Or actually we can just, probably should keep it 2 tabs so that people can vote in one tab, and then we'll have another tab where it shows the testing coverage right now. So I'll make that a to-do for me. So in the testing spreadsheet, which is pretty bare bones, let's see here. Not sure what that first tab actually is supposed to mean. I think it's just, is there any test for that maybe? And then that sheet 1, the second sheet, is I think the specific test cases that we wanted to implement, right, for each one. But you guys who were writing the tests probably should remind me, because I haven't looked at them.
I think Josh did a lot of the test infrastructure here, so he may know better than
Josh and Dan did.
Typical lack of documentation here. So clearly not self-documenting. I'm just gonna look at, we're not helping. I'm just going to the GitHub repo and look at the test section.
Okay, I will take a meet for the next meeting. Yeah, I will walk through the feature list and trying to identify files. Yes.
So
I will do. I promised.
Okay. So that's Nikolai, who has had the historic testing tickets. I'll just copy this content into the sheet, so we just have one sheet, and then you go through the actual tests that are written, update.
Yes, and through the feature list and try to identify
the feature
what
list.
At least I will create like empty test files with the description what should be there, and then we can work together to fill them out.
That sounds good.
Yeah, for me the stopper was because I don't know which implementation to use while I'm writing tests, but I will use JavaScript one, which is part of the spec. Yeah.
I'm gonna say for Nikolai, create like empty or stub tests.
I will create all these files. Yeah, with some content. Yeah, I will dedicate the half day for that this week.
So,
and we had a meeting on Friday, so usually I was able to find time. But now it's the beginning of the week, and at the end of the week you will forget everything about SQL and FHIR. Small shift, but it's huge in terms of the result.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm just looking through the to-dos in case there's anything outstanding. I think we've deferred some of the writing up of ideas that were a little bit abstract. Let's focus on the voting for features. I think that's the next step there. And then we can defer that work. Let's not do that work in case there's more pressing.
Yeah, let's do this. And maybe guys are interested in reading out what we have in spec and bringing like some comments. So that's another useful stuff where people can contribute. Let's read the spec and come back with the comments or ideas.
Like, you want to do that live right now? You want to do that live? Or like
not live, I mean everybody will personally read the spec and come up with the comments, what's unclear, what's missed.
Yeah.
And then we will create some backlog for Ryan as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we can advertise that as a to-do for everyone to take a pass through the spec, add comments, and generate discussion for where the spec needs to be clarified. I think that's a good next step as well. Anything else? Review test coverage against spec. Well, that's what we were just talking about. CI/CD and 8box infrastructure. So that's
guys, yes. And when I will promise them that we are freezing all the namings, I think we will get this.
John, I see you have shared test reports from Pathling. I don't know where that landed.
So I think that really makes sense once we have a tagged version. So I think we already currently pass everything, but I don't think there are enough tests as we've just shown. And I think we're also talking about creating another page like on the spec to publish these things. So I think it's kind of wrapped up in that GitHub issue as well, which is to sort of enhance the spec itself or add another page to it.
Yeah,
So
page already there, but it has some bugs. It should be fixed. Yeah, it's on my site as well. Yeah, or maybe somebody want to contribute.
Is that in the spec itself, or
it is? It's built with the actions and published on GitHub pages. So I think I shared this. Yes, I can refresh and come up with this stuff. The application which built with the GitHub actions.
I don't think I've ever seen it on the site itself, unless you're talking somewhere else.
It lives on a GitHub pages and should be referenced from.
Okay, it's a link somewhere. I still don't think I've ever seen it, but maybe we need, because I mean I've seen the tech matrix page, but I don't think I've ever seen a link out from the spec that says this is a test SPA or something like that.
Wasn't finished. Yeah.
Wasn't finished. Okay, let's keep that in mind, because if we thought that it was there, I don't think anybody has seen it necessarily. So once we have more work done on that, then let's add the link to it, or we can add the link now.
Yeah, I can send link here to the.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of broken. There should be playground and implementation list, and I see everything is broken. Yeah. Okay. So it's to me to fix it, or if somebody want to join, ping me. I think it's Svelte application.
Yeah. So with regard to the pathling side of that, how about I create an issue to do the final bit to upload to an S3 bucket and create that as a pathling issue, and then we can remove this sort of recurring to do from
yeah, sure. List. Yeah, it's really fair. I mean, once this stabilizes, then it's actually relevant, right? So yeah, I can get rid of that one. I don't have anything else, so I think it might be a good time to open it up to the floor. If anybody has any agenda items.
Seems like it's a matter of voting. I mean, on that sheet and kind of working through these issues. I feel like a lot of it can make progress asynchronously. But yeah, it's kind of seems like a lot of dotting the i's and crossing t's at this point. But I don't know. Are there any other? It's nice to see that nobody's had I haven't seen any big requests for major gaps or anything between now and the 1.0 stuff, which I think is a great sign. So we're getting close.
Did any of the newer people have any thoughts or want to share anything more about their particular use case and their impressions of how what we've come up with so far might be able to map onto that?
This is Aaron, and I'm still, I spent probably 10 minutes looking to build the repo last week, and this might be just my newness to it, but it's built on Ruby on Rails. Is that correct?
I mean, there's a JavaScript.
Yeah, that's the big issue. People coming to GitHub repo and there is no link to publish. So we should put it on a README at the top, because I'm always jumping to Zulip and looking for where our IG is published. So let's link from GitHub to IG page.
So there is a
this is IG publisher. And it is really GKIL based or something like this. So it's not Ruby on Rails, but it's GKIL based stuff. Yeah, but it is published using IG publisher, which was built by Josh. And yeah, we definitely have to put the link right on the README from GitHub repo to the published version. Otherwise, it's hard to find where the spec by themselves.
Are you talking about the FHIR org link?
Yeah.
It's there.
So
it's there, Nikolai. It's just on the side. Yeah. It's not in the front of the repo.
Yeah, it's in the about section in the link stuff.
Yeah. That's a quick fix. So
so there's a set of scripts in there that build the spec, but we have a continuous integration thing going so that everything that's been pushed to the main branch automatically goes to that website. So I've just added an issue to add a link to that in a prominent place on the README.
Yeah, I see it's on the right side, but
Explicit. I actually had a question about the continuous integration. Does that also work with pull requests, and is there a build that is constructed out of a PR or a separate branch, not master?
question to Josh.
Okay.
I think IG Builder do support text, but maybe I may be wrong.
Yeah, I'll go investigate that, because I'm curious, because if I want to make some edits and put them on, obviously on a separate branch, like I might want to see them, some that might be more visual as well. So I don't love the classic HL7 style sheet. I was like, might want to make some tweaks there, but we'll see how that goes over. But yeah, that's all I had. Hey, anything else?
I think it is publishing our pull requests somewhere, because I can see these actions that are doing something with GitHub pages for every commit to a pull request. So I think there is something there.
But they're two build systems, yes. So they run in parallel. So the IG Builder by themselves watching repo and rebuilding, and then this is one build for IG and another build for this single page application for test and playground. It's by GitHub Actions. So they kind of two separate builds.
Yep. So that's what the GitHub Actions. So the GitHub Actions doesn't do it. The IG Builder like watches the repo. Like, oh, interesting. That's
yeah. Probably through the webhook, but yeah, for now, the GitHub Action, they running tests against reference JavaScript implementation, and they building this test page and not finished playground with a JavaScript implementation, and publish it to GitHub pages, not to the same place where spec is published.
Got it. So it's maybe unlikely that every commit on every branch is getting picked up by IG publisher and then being processed. I don't know. We'll see. I'll ask Josh. All right. Yeah, so we only have a few minutes left, but yeah, if anybody has final comments for today.
And I have a question for Aaron. Aaron, are you going to implement like SQL on FHIR v2 and the same for Jake, or you just watching now?
Well, I'm curious because what we have in our package is SQL on FHIR. And so like what I'm working on now is building out a few of the edge cases and like showing some demos of like how you'd run SQL on FHIR. For like the one use case I'm looking at is just if you had ADT messages coming in, right, admission, discharge, transfer, how would you see patients in real time in a hospital? Like that's a very common use case to connect to the ADT feed. So it's really writing a SQL statement, and we're in a Spark environment. So Spark has some differences where it can handle some of the more complex representations. And so like I'd love to kind of like compare that and like say like what does that look like with SQL on FHIR version 2 and see like how those two solutions compare. Because at the end of the day, like I think somebody else was saying this, I think it was John, that if you represent the data in tables, there's some natural relationship that happens. So one is just the representation of the data. And then two is what are some of the permutations I would run on top of that within that relationship. So I'm kind of on that second stage of like, now that we have it represented, how do we start to work with these representations, and what are the common use cases that would be like an ADT feed from a hospital? But I'd love to kind of share that and kind of see where the rest of the group is and like how we can combine these.
I'm just curious because you are three guys who are doing Spark, yes? Bashir, John, and you. So, and this is going to be like 3 implementations.
In our case, it's I think what John is doing is very specifically on the Spark. So what we do is mostly we try to stop at Parquet or any database. So and then one way to query Parquet is through Spark, which we recommend. But then the other piece, which is we try to keep the two pieces independent of each other. The other piece is that, okay, now if you want to do query on Spark, then let us give you a tool that does SQL on FHIR v2 to Spark SQL transformation, which is mostly the work that Ryan and his team has done, and someone from my team has contributed to address it for Spark as well. But I guess what John is doing is more directly on top of the Spark instance.
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of pieces that you need really. Like that the encoders piece is how you get from raw FHIR to like a schema representation, which you can then do, like what you're saying, your subsequent transformations on that. So if you're talking about streaming data, you might get like a bundle or a composition or some sort of collection of resources in, and you're probably pulling that apart and encoding each resource type and creating like a streaming data set of each resource type. And then there's a view for each resource type, right? So you can execute a view over that encoded schema and transform it into something else. And that can still be a stream at that stage, as long as the runner that you're using is compatible with streaming in the transformations that it's doing there. And then as long as those things, I think the tricky thing with streaming is making sure that those streams are sort of coming in at the same time, and a sort of the termination or reconciliation of those streams. But I think it's totally possible, and we've done that sort of thing before, and some people who use our solution have used Kafka and pathling encoders and Spark SQL transformations on top of that. And there's a bit of a demo repo actually that I could point towards, which shows it all in action. But I think it's all technically feasible. But I think the two main things are like the encoders, which is basically like this SQL on FHIR v1 spec, like a sort of columnar schema. So that's what, if you look at the guidance section and you look at the columnar schema guidance, that's what that's all based on. And then the view runner is like the next on top of that.
John and Bashir, I'd like to, like, maybe at some point in a future meeting, just kind of show you what we have and just kind of see where it overlaps. And because like at the end of the day, like, and this is my naive view as a data engineer, is like, at the end of the day, FHIR is a representation of data. And if I wanted to build a data pipeline, I would build it like anything else, right? It's a representation of 157 different resources, which can lightly be thought of as tables. And those tables have both like inherent and explicit relationships. And so the way I would build an ADT feed would be different than the way I'd build a prior auth feed, would be different than I'd build a claim feed. But at the end of the day, if I abstracted and just treat them as tables, and I treat them as a relationship to say I can identify that relationship, to identify what type of resources they are, then like everything from there becomes whatever bespoke data model you want to build downstream, right? Like every healthcare customer has a claims data model, right? And it's all different, right? Nobody has a true overlap with that, but there's a lot of commonality between them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's exactly the whole point of this initiative really, is to create a mechanism, a standards-based mechanism for creating that next layer of sort of use case specific views off the base FHIR views. So yes, when you get FHIR data in, the only real sane way to deal with it in the first instance is to deal with each resource type. But then you don't want your customers to have to deal with all the complexity of navigating FHIR and joining it together and dealing with all the data types and all the rest of it. So you want to create your use case specific views for them to consume, like whether it be an ADT view or whatever. So we see SQL on FHIR as being a way of representing queries that can do projections of that FHIR data, such that, but we don't want to go too far. So we allow you to project that FHIR data out and then use the generic tools like Spark SQL to do that final bit of transformation, join things together, and create that final view that your customer's going to use, if that makes sense.
It does. I just want to use the word view, but I see exactly what you're saying. That's yeah, like you would build different bespoke ones for different use cases, and you're providing that base layer to go about it.
Yeah, and we're helping with the FHIR specific stuff. Like we don't want to create some sort of another sort of general purpose query language. We want to create a sort of construct that allows you to reach into the FHIR data model and create a simple projection that can be operated on in a really fairly interoperable way from just plain SQL. So that's what we've focused on in terms of the spec, because it would be tempting to just keep going, but people need help with the FHIR specific aspects of it, not the sort of generic query and transformation functionality.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious too, and we might be at time, and I apologize, but like I'm curious too if there's an opportunity for us to say, if we build it bi-directional or think about it from a bi-directional purpose, to say if we go from FHIR to these views, theoretically we should be able to go from the views back to FHIR. And if we maintain that construct that we can always represent that, like don't we like pigeonhole us into like a really good spot? Like that's where my mind's been as I've been kind of working through this, to say if you can guarantee that bi-directional representation, you're not losing anything as you translate to different languages. Like whether that's SQL, whether that's a Spark data frame, whether it's like another language that you would write in, but having that, you would maintain all those capabilities to make sure that you're not building anything that's going to be into the representation.
I don't think we're so ambitious to do like bi-directional stuff. For now, we're just talking like do one directional, but use case specific.
Like we did do bi-directional with the sort of with the encoders. So we've got a lossless representation of FHIR data that we can put into a Spark schema, but that doesn't extend to the use case specific views where you would effectively sort of have to run these views in reverse. Yeah, I think that's, if it's possible, I haven't figured out how to do it yet.
I think that's a really interesting question to share.
Yeah, I would just say that if you need bi-directional, and if you haven't already, I would say make sure you take a look at SQL on FHIR v1, that columnar representation, because that's how we do it basically. I mean, you can go to the columnar and then you can come back, although it's not 100% lossless, but yeah.
But I think it's for me, it's not transformations. It's too isomorphic to FHIR. Yeah, it's just FHIR in Parquet or FHIR in column.
Yeah, that's something I think about sometimes. It's an interesting like kind of philosophical point, right? Like, if these are isomorphic transformations, like is this FHIR? Like you have a table, and is that like FHIR in air quotes? I mean, I don't know. Is it a, let's call it a like an official, or does have some officialness to this as a representation of FHIR data, maybe a limited subset of FHIR data, but a subset nonetheless. I think that's an interesting kind of philosophical question. I don't know if it has like a lot of relevance other than probably from people do argue things like this. I'll be blunt, but it may not have any like practical relevance to our work, but I think it's an interesting question.
Well, actually, I would say we are out of time, but maybe at some point, I actually love that next year we get to a point that we can actually discuss the columnar representation, because I think that is very relevant to what we're doing. And then come to I mean, that could be part of this, like hopefully at some point. This is how you represent FHIR data in a schema format, like I mean in a database schema format.
Yeah, that's what we call it, layer 0. And we initially started, but we definitely have to get back to that because the bulk API guys still waiting, Parquet.
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually one of the main use cases. Exactly.
Yeah, I for my opinion, and then I'll have to go, but that should be even though what we're working on right now and is really about milestone 1 and view definitions, like these are inseparable work streams. These are inseparable initiatives. Exactly like what we call them and where they land may be up for debate, but you're going to face these issues very soon, and we don't want this abstract schema definition layer, right? And just say like you're on your own when it comes to the actual like columnar format or those formats. And I don't think we would take that approach. I would say I'd like this to be a project that can tackle both those initiatives at once in a more serious way than we've done so far. Cool. So I have to go, but all right. Thanks everybody.
Thank you guys.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.